AI is never going to change a contactor or capacitor. It's never going to clean a coil. It's never going to change a filter. Never going to put a new furnace in. Never going to modify your ductwork. Well, people are a little concerned about AI infringing on their territory. It really can't take away the services and things that we provide. It can just, augment them, make things better, make things easier, make things a little faster, maybe a little more
Yeah.
thorough.
You said that you had basically you had been an HVAC tech for what, 15 years, and then you.
Yeah, 15 years plus. I mean, I really never stopped being an HVAC tech. I just stopped working in the field. So,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. And then you went towards the training side of it, and you did that for 12 years.
Yeah, that was a high school vocational school teacher teaching heating and air conditioning. So I did that for 12 years. And I also taught adult education programs for Carrier and did their Carrier Protex classes and did a lot of contractor training, worked for Testo. I was a technical specialist for, I want to say 6 or 8 years for Testo.
Hmm.
During that time, I also started True Tech Tools with my father.
What did True Tech Tools do?
True Tech Tools is one of the largest internet distributors of HVAC tools in the country right now. So
Okay.
um, I started that back when I worked for Testo, and year two we were Testo's largest distributor in the country, and so I mean we've been cranking away at that for a while. I'm no longer involved with True Tech except for renting office space from them. I rent my offices over here, but yeah, and then I got into designing. I designed the very first wireless manifold that talked to your smartphone. So
Hmm.
and then from there it led to smart probes, is what the guys call them today. Ours were actually
Okay.
Zigbee and instead of Bluetooth, but and then really got out of the hardware world and just immersed in the software side. So that's what MeasureQuick does today. We primarily do test and measurement software for, but it's a universal application. So instead of having, just a one piece of hardware that we interface with everybody's tools just about in the entire industry.
Was there something that like kind of put you over the edge of like this type of software doesn't exist and needs to be created? Like what took you from where you were to wanting to start MeasureQuick
Well, I
or
mean,
starting True Tools and then MeasureQuick?
yeah, the challenge was when we started was people were taking like almost every single manufacturer of a Bluetooth tool just simply duplicates the screen that they have on their device on their smartphone display,
Okay.
or they've eliminated the display altogether and they're using their smartphone as the display. So it's novel and interesting, and you can see things remotely. You got a computer and you're basically using it to surf the internet. It's like you're way underutilizing what this computer will do. This $1,000 computer you can do in your pocket, right? So the whole idea behind MeasureQuick, and it really came from when I was teaching, is if you're going to make a measurement, you better have some kind of expectation of what the measurement should be. Because if you don't, why are you making it? Like,
Hmm.
I could tell you your gauge pressures are 118 and 360. Well, okay. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything without any context behind it. You got to
Right.
understand what drives the measurement and what the allowable range is for that measurement, and then you can determine if your pressures are too high or too low or whatever. And then if we make multiple measurements and we look at, like, okay, my suction pressure is high, my superheat is low, and my amp draw is high, and this is, like, we can look at all those measurements in aggregate and then solve bigger problems.
Hmm.
So it wasn't just about, and what was interesting is there wasn't anybody else in the industry that could really do that well.
Okay.
Because my background in teaching and the fundamentals, we had really spent a lot of time focusing on measurements and how measurements work and measurement uncertainty and measurement, aggregating measurements to do diagnostics. And, the rest of the industry, I mean, they're still having trouble calculating superheat and subcooling, so we looked at it as, we could have our own tool that would do all this stuff and that would be nifty, but wouldn't it be even better if we could capture all HVAC technicians independent of what tools they were using and have a much larger audience to market services to. Because,
Yeah.
our end game was like most tool manufacturers, they want to be tool manufacturers. They don't really want to be in the app business. They're sort of, the arm is twisted that way because the whole industry's headed towards connected tools. So it ends up being a huge overhead cost unless you have a way of monetizing it, because you got to make this app, you got to support this app, you got to continue to support it over 5 years for the people on the tools. Right. You got all the social media fallout if your app doesn't work right, and app store reviews, and it's like it's very daunting for a manufacturer to go down that road and build these apps out.
So if I'm understanding correctly, MeasureQuick basically integrates with all those different tools and takes the numbers from those tools, even if they're from different manufacturers, takes the numbers and then uses some sort of built-in intelligence to make suggestions on, is the unit good to go, or this could be what's wrong with it, or am I kind of understanding how it works?
We can troubleshoot well over 150 different problems, in single problems than in aggregate, and combinations of problems. So it's
I feel like that kind of, even at a basic level of like seeing, taking those different data points and coming up with like, okay, here's what it could be. I feel like that, I don't know much about HVAC, but I feel like that kind of, to get to that level would take an HVAC technician, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years of experience?
10, 20 years of experience.
10, 20,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of technicians, our training in the HVAC industry is horrible. And so a lot of technicians learn from each other, and they learn the wrong things, and they make assumptions about things. And because they don't have anybody to push back on them, their assumptions then become facts, and their facts are convoluted and wrong. And so they end up spending a lot of time measuring the wrong things, adjusting the wrong things. We already know that between 70 and 90% of systems have at least one major fault in them that are installed today. So, I mean, that's a huge amount of systems that are not running properly, and a lot of those were just serviced by technicians. And you got to ask yourself, if there's seven out of 10 and 9 out of 10 systems have problems, are your techs the one finding them that way, or are they leaving them that way? Because the other thing we're doing is we're missing all this opportunity to generate revenue because technicians aren't properly identifying charge and airflow issues and installation issues that are compromising operation.
Yeah, because if they find those, that's an extra. If it's not something they did, if it's something they found, obviously, then that's an extra repair ticket right there. Why do you think training in this industry is as bad as it is?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, part of it is the technology is changing at such a rapid pace that the educators can't keep up with it. Part of it is just the people. A lot of the people that we hire to educate don't embrace modern technologies. They use a lot of the same rules of thumb that they used when they were coming in. So, and then there's really no formal, aside from maybe a union apprenticeship or something like that. There's not a lot of formalized training, and even some of those training programs are becoming dated. So we tend to teach a lot of the fundamentals that we're teaching today. Like if you think about a gas furnace, for example, like the gas furnace when I was in school, it had a draft hood and a standing pilot and a thermocouple. It was pretty simple. And then about the time I exited school, they came out with the 80 plus and the 90 plus furnaces, so now all of a sudden I had to know that 70 plus I had to understand how an 80 plus works. Now I also got to understand how a 90 plus works. Now today I got to understand how a direct fire works. So it's like the equipment lasts for 20 years, 30 years. So you got to know everything that I knew when I was in school, plus all the new stuff that's out there, all the way through the inverter technology, right? So we've gotten a point now where, in my opinion, like you can't know everything in our industry. You're almost better off as a specialist, but you can't be so specialized that you can't do other things, right? Because you get yourself in a pickle there.
So basically, like, somebody could be perfectly caught up on the technology that's there today, and in 5 years, 10 years, there will be a whole, like, it wouldn't be enough to get them where they need to be at that point.
It depends on how fast you learn and how much technology you embrace. I mean, a lot of
Hmm.
contractors, once they get comfortable with a piece of equipment, that's a piece of equipment they install. They don't branch out and do new things.
Uh,
So they stick with one brand. They stick with, and they
is there any benefit to sticking with one brand?
yeah. I mean, absolutely. The big benefit is you learn all the nuances of that brand, and
Hmm.
obviously you have better relationships with your wholesalers and things like that. But there's also, I mean, a lot of people don't like to do that because, look at the 454B shortage right now. If you're working with a dealer that has 454B, you're challenged right now. Where,
Mm,
maybe if you had an R32 and an R54B dealership you're working with, it might take some load off you. So yeah, it's not without its
right.
challenges. I mean, it's just a business decision.
Gotcha. So, wi- for an HVAC company that's trying to keep their technicians trained, keep them up to date, um, what do you feel like is a good, consistent, regular amount of training? Um, yeah, I'm just curious.
So it's weekly, believe it or not, and it's not advanced training. It's reinforcing the fundamentals. Our industry has forgotten a lot of uh, our industry has forgotten a lot of the fundamentals, and the fundamentals
Mhm.
are like, if you don't know the fundamentals, if you don't understand evacuation, you don't understand airflow, you don't understand refrigerant charging, which a lot of technicians don't. In fact, most technicians
Okay.
have no vehicle to even measure airflow. They don't have any tools to measure airflow. Their idea of airflow is good as they hold their hand over the duct and they feel airflow coming out. So
Hmm.
if you don't understand the fundamentals, then learning the advanced stuff becomes impossible. And I used to go out and teach adult education classes and things like that, and I would figure out very quickly that it wasn't the advanced stuff people were struggling with. It was some little fundamental thing that they had never learned that was
Hmm.
stopping them from understanding the technology they were looking at. So
So, do you feel like the fundamentals kind of give you like a sort of like a high level overview that allows you to kind of plug in the advanced knowledge
yeah,
more
yeah.
where it needs to go, type of thing?
Well, if you don't understand the basics of what you do, if you don't understand, properties of air, and like just did a video the other day on temperature split. So how much temperature difference should you have between supply and return air on a furnace? And when you have humidity in the air, you turn around, you're turning the water vapor in the air to water, and that takes
Hmm.
about 970 BTUs of water or of energy per pound of water condensed. And so what happens is the amount of temperature split goes down. So in other words, you go from like a 20-degree split down to a 13-degree split because you're doing all this dehumidification. You've changed the type of work that you do from cooling to dehumidifying. And so, some technicians would do a startup and they see that low temperature split and they think they right away they have a high airflow, so they slow the fan down, which
Hmm.
is the worst thing they could do because now they're or speed the fan up, excuse me, because they're exacerbating. No, slow it down because they have a 13-degree split. They slow the fan down, and they're
Hmm.
exacerbating the problem, and so they end up now with really low airflow instead of just a marginally low airflow, let's say.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you need to kind of know the basics to know what's going on there.
Right.
So you feel like for that regular ongoing training, it's like reinforcing over and over again the fundamentals, the kind of like the science behind it, and
Yeah.
then for more
That's
than kind of like the changes that are. What do you think is like a good split between like, hey, here's the new stuff that's coming out versus like reinforcing those basics?
well, I mean, so like we use, like MeasureQuick is the software tool that we've developed, and it basically does all the basic calculations for you, so you can focus on what's happening instead of what you're calculating. So a lot of
Mm,
technicians will a ton of technicians will be so fixated on doing the calculations that they don't really understand what the calculation means. So like
I see.
if
Okay.
I ask somebody, what's superheat, and they'll tell me, well, you take the suction line temperature and you subtract the saturation temperature. I'm like, no, no, no. That's how you calculate superheat. What is superheat? And though they don't know. So it's really important that we that we spend the time also to look at the relationships that are going on, because an air conditioning system's dynamic. As soon as you turn it on, the temperature starts to drop, the humidity starts to drop, the return air temperatures changing, supply air temperatures changing, the pressures are changing, superheat's changing, subcooling's changing, enthalpy, all this stuff. I mean, it's all happening in real time. And if in software we can do all the calculations because it's a computer, we can do them effortlessly and in real time, and we end up with you can focus on the relationships between the measurements instead of the calculations themselves.
Right. Okay.
So a big advantage, like when you're trying to teach somebody about how things work in an air conditioning system, is to focus on what the measurement is and what it means in regard to system operation versus how to calculate it. And so what we're trying to do in software is let us take care of the math, let us take care of the calculations, and let the technicians start to better understand the relationship between the readings and the readings and the measurements, so that they can better troubleshoot the system, right?
Okay. So the technicians, you're basically taking that time and energy that they would have had to focus on just getting those calculations to begin with, and you're now giving them back that time and energy to now really focus on what's actually happening.
Yeah, what's it mean? Right, what's it mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
That totally makes sense.
yeah, if you think about like a lot of technologies, it has enabled us to do that. I mean, years ago when the Apple IIe computers came out, back when I was in middle school or whatever, we were focused on how a computer works, what RAM is, what memory is, what all the things about how computers are actually assembled and built and what they do and what all these different things were. Today, they focus on how to use a computer, and not even how to use a computer. Like we're focused on how to turn it on and how to plug it in. Today, it's about, how do we use ChatGPT, or how do we use some other internet tool? Like all the other stuff you learned when you were 3. You learned how to turn on your parents' iPad and go into settings to get it connected to Wi-Fi. We're not teaching that stuff anymore. Right. But, to think about how in this, the HVAC industry really didn't have a tool to do that, and that's sort of the tool that we've manufactured. So
I wonder if in the future you'll have AI systems, and they'll teach you how to write prompts for the AI system to create better prompts, and then it'll just keep keep getting more high level.
No, I think it's going to. I mean, it is interesting when you're looking at some people will tell you that like ChatGPT isn't strong in doing certain things, and it's just not prompted well. I mean, that's the whole thing. If you ask it a generic question, it's going to give you a generic answer. If you ask it a well-prompted question, it's going to give you a much deeper, more thoughtful response. So, and part of that's just teaching people how to use some of the tools. We use AI in MeasureQuick, but what we use it for is to do some of the work the technicians don't like doing, which is, taking the data off the labels and inputting into the software so we can have makes, models, serial numbers, and information off the label that we need to calculate targets.
So like quickly being able to scan and just get all the information in without manually punching.
We can take a couple of photos and have everything we need.
Do you use AI for some of the like intelligence portion of it, as far as like, because as far as I understand, like MeasureQuick does take some of those data points and give suggestions on what could be going on with the unit. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we've been doing AI since before AI was popular. I mean, that's what MeasureQuick is artificial intelligence. It uses some Bayesian mathematics. So we're doing, part of it's human, part of it's calculations, and it determines based off the faults what the highest probability of something being wrong is. So, I mean, it's interesting when people think of AI, they think of things like ChatGPT, but we're using, we were doing, using the software to solve problems, which is, basically the same. It's classic AI, 2 or 3 years ago, 5 years ago. So, I mean, it's just our tools aren't near as sophisticated as they are today. Right. I mean, it's just, so we got better tools today.
So do you guys see yourself implementing more AI as time goes on to do more and more of the thinking work?
No,
that's
less and less of
involved?
the thinking work and more of the clerical work.
The menial.
Yeah, the menial task.
So are there more menial things that you can foresee or that you guys plan on training AI to be able to take over?
Uh, I think right now we've got it primarily doing the profiling. So but I could see it doing things like summarizing service tickets and things like that, explaining what work was done,
Hmm.
what it found, what work was done. A lot of technicians don't like writing up all the invoice work, and then
Sure.
it's always a mess, too. So I think those are things that we'll use AI to like summarize what testing was done, what the results of the testing were, and what the final operation of the equipment is. Um,
Hmm.
but the thing is with trying to use AI to do diagnostics and things, it only knows what you tell it, and if you don't tell it a whole story, it's going to make some very broad assumptions about
Right.
how things work. I mean, it's sort of like again, it comes back to prompting. If you and
Hmm.
prompting takes a lot of time to actually. You could spend as much time doing your prompt as you could formulating your question, or longer with the prompt, because you need to put a lot of context in for the AI to actually provide you anything that's valuable. Otherwise, it just provides a lot of garbage. And
Right.
we're still seeing a lot of AI that is where it hallucinates, like it acts. I would say more than hallucinating, it acts like an authority on things it really doesn't understand, and it
Right.
and it sounds so believable. Like you'll read this, and sometimes I'll just when I'm like playing with it, I'll say, you're full of crap. This is wrong, completely wrong. You don't even know what you're talking about. And I'll say, well, fair enough.
Right.
Let's get into some more detail so I can get a better answer. And it's like it if you're I mean, AI can probably help us solve some of the biggest problems in our industry, but it could also make some of the biggest mistakes. And who's going to be
Yeah.
responsible for those? You know what I'm saying? Like who's going to be responsible for
Yeah.
those mistakes? And so I think we need to leave thinking to humans and task oriented things to AI, because
Hmm.
if you screw up a
Maybe
task.
it's a little bit of a stair step, like just only task oriented stuff, and then like, okay, what's like the bottom tier of like thinking work that like it
Mhm,
gets right, 99.9% of the time type of thing, and then just gradually like work it up or something.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's it's an interesting concept. I mean, but AI's got to get better before we're going to rely on it, for
Mm,
and I think training people and teaching people those relationships is much more valuable than having AI just spit out the answer. I mean, there is some value because we don't always have access to all the technology we need, right? So
right.
somebody being able to do that on their own, I think, is really important. So, um, you know, I think for the next at least 4 or 5 years, I don't see AI taking over. And the interesting thing is too, I mean, in our industry, we really just got to know what's wrong. AI is never going to change a contactor or capacitor. It's never going to clean a coil. It's never going to change a filter. It's never going to put a new furnace in. It's never going to modify your ductwork. So,
Mm,
well, people are a little concerned about AI infringing on their, on in their territory. It really can't take away the services and things that we provide. It can just, augment them, make things better, make things easier, make things a little faster, maybe a little more
yeah.
thorough. So,
Yeah, I think I definitely see a danger in like people thinking that AI is like seeing it as a replacement for the work they do. We're seeing that more and more with like AI call centers and stuff like that. I think that how I guess my preference for utilizing AI is like how can it make me better at what I do? How can I utilize it as another tool versus a replacement?
well, that's the challenge we have today is people are trying to use AI to think instead of augment what they're doing, right? So
Mm,
like you have a lot of people that'll say, write me a paper on this or that. And when I'm using AI, like if I'm drafting an email, I might draft an email and dump it in and say, hey, can you make this a little bit clearer for me, or can you rewrite this to make it whatever, just improve it. But I
Yeah.
don't tell AI I need an email that's going to turn down that's going to do this or that or explain this to a customer. And a lot of
Right.
people will do that and then they don't even read it. I mean, they just
Hmm.
copy and paste it into what they're doing, and you can't allow those type of tools to think for you. And it's the same thing with
Yeah.
MeasureQuick. I mean, we we always on a lot of our stuff, unless it's very definitive, we say, you may be low on charge. It could be something else, but all the indicators point you're low on refrigerant. But
Hmm.
you could have an issue with refrigerant migration. So until you investigate these other things, we really can't definitively tell you. Other times, there's so many symptoms of something that I can say, okay, there's 6 symptoms of this. Definitively, you have a charge problem. And so
Hmm.
it does require a human to actually do some additional assessment and
Okay.
put their hands on things. Look at conditions of coils. Like, you can't. I can tell you your condenser. Looks like your condenser may be dirty, but it could be air recirculating around the condenser. It could be plants that are growing up around the condenser. It could be all kinds of things. But until somebody puts an eyeball on it and says, yeah, definitively that's what it is or not, you know,
Yeah.
we can't definitively tell you.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. I think even from the standpoint of a human making a decision versus AI, I feel better about if it's going to impact me. I feel better about a conscious being who is aware of that impact, is aware of me, making those decisions than a machine that just is going to like and then spit out something. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
especially if you're going to hang your hat on it. I mean,
right.
um, but there are things like we're seeing people today use MeasureQuick, and Mrs. Jones, I ran a scan in her system. Here's what the software came back with, so we need to investigate
Hmm.
this, and this. It does take some onus off the technician, especially when they're younger or they're greener. It's like gives a little bit more confidence to the consumer that
Hmm.
a third party analysis was done. So I mean, today
Right.
we expect a technician to deploy 9 probes, get them in the right place, let the software do an assessment of how the system's operating, let it assist you with the diagnostic, and then you take over and do the repair and then test back out and make sure that the repair is done right.
Right. Does MeasureQuick take like data points from like so you have a lot of technicians using it. I think 18,000 on the platform, something
Oh,
like that.
yeah, a little bit more than that. 100,
How many you got now?
there's over 130,000 registered users on it.
130. Okay. I was
Yeah.
looking at old information.
Yeah, no,
All right, cool.
it's and probably out of those registered users, probably 30,000 of them are old accounts that are no good anymore.
Okay.
There's probably like, I don't know, there's a good chunk of users on MeasureQuick still, but I mean accounts do turn over, technicians leave, go to other companies, that kind of stuff. So you got to start
Right.
weeding all that out. But yeah,
Well, my question was going to be like, do you guys take the data? Like, let's say the app reads a certain set of measurements. The technician, um, you know, decides on a repair and maybe like enters that back into MeasureQuick, and then that way MeasureQuick has like a cloud to see like what was like what the readings were, and then what the common actual issue is. Like, is there some way that you're taking that aggregate data from all the people using it and then using that to build the intelligence up a little bit?
all that data is highly dependent upon the conditions the equipment's operating under. So if you have somebody in Arizona doing a startup and it's 100 degrees in the house because it's been off all day,
Mm,
it's going to run way different than a system will in Maine where it's 72 degrees
okay.
and 65 degrees outside, right? I mean, it's all the equipment. I mean, and you can normalize all that stuff and you can do a lot of that. But the thing that we don't know a lot of times is um, like every system is unique. So when you
Mm,
it's every system has its own line set length, its own duct work, its own
right.
air pressures, its own charge, its own everything, because everyone is sort of hand built and hand installed. So what using software is about optimizing the operation of the installed system, right? Sometimes we can never get it optimized right because the duct system's undersized or there's some other maybe an undersized line set or there's some other issue.
Hmm.
But what you're really trying to do with a software like MeasureQuick is take an imperfectly installed system and getting it working as perfectly as you can, right?
Okay.
And then we benchmark that system so we know what we know what where starting place is for that unit. So we know
Hmm.
that this unit on this date was doing this and it was operating as perfectly as it could. And then we turn around and um, from that point on, that's the baseline that we use to evaluate that system's operation, and we try and return it to that baseline when we service it.
Okay. That makes sense. So using a tool like MeasureQuick, um, how long, what do you think is a good amount of trade, someone who's fresh out of trade school, right? Let's say you're hiring them fresh out of trade school. What do you feel like is a good amount of time to get that technician like adept? Um,
Well,
if they're using MeasureQuick.
you should be using MeasureQuick in trade school. I mean, it's free application, so it's a good place to start. Again, everybody's like, oh, you need to learn how to do all this, calculate all this, do all that. And it's like, you're better off learning to leverage technology than how necessarily the technology all works. I mean, the way that
Mm,
we taught, like I said, back when we were in grade school and learning everything about a computer versus kids today learning how to use the tool. It's like they don't learn anything about memory or how an
sure.
iPad works or how a touch interface works. I mean, they're learning how to actually use the tool, and that's the same thing we should be doing in today with tools like MeasureQuick. We should be putting them in kids' hands early so they can understand the relationship between the measurements versus just how they're calculated. And
Mm,
the cool thing
okay.
is, if you learn how to put the probes in the right locations, the tool's going to make the right calculation, period. It's never going to miscalculate. It's a calculator. It's a job, right? So a lot of that, and things are changing so fast by the time sometimes you get, like if you got to calculate a target superheat, you need to go inside and get return air wet bulb. You need to go outside and get outdoor air temperature. Then you need to pull out a chart and figure out where the wet bulb and the dry bulb intersect. And you got to figure out, what's that target. And by the time you figure out all that stuff, the target could have changed again, right? Because the indoor
Hmm.
conditions change again. So it's like when you're using software, all that stuff's updating and calculating in real time. So when a student can see the relationships instead of just
Sure.
understanding the mathematics behind it, it's like they have an epiphany and they have a much deeper understanding of the system much earlier on in their careers than you might
Hmm.
have with somebody that is just trying to learn the traditional way that everybody learned.
Well, what I'm just thinking of is, there's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of contractors out there who are hesitant to, hire on completely green guys and train them. When in today's market with how competitive, the shortage of people in the trades, it's kind of what you have to do in a lot of cases. So I'm just curious, like from your if somebody's like, deciding whether to do that, in your experience, like how long does it actually, how much training and how long does it actually take, if they are using something like MeasureQuick,
Six 6 to 8
to
weeks.
six
Six,
to eight
yeah,
weeks.
yeah. I mean, you basically.
Interesting.
So what you got to do is there's two things you're teaching. One is the probe placement with MeasureQuick, and the second's the mechanics of what we do. So you need to train somebody how to change a condenser fan motor, how to braze, how to solder, how to recover refrigerant from a machine, right? How to
Hmm.
all the fundamentals of repair. Not and that breadth and depth can change. Like if you're talking a um, a commissioning technician or a service technician. If there's a leak in the system, you might say, hey, we're going to send out an advanced technician that's going to recover the gas and do all these
Hmm.
things. But let's say you want a PM technician. Like you need the guy that's going to go out to all your service contracts and PM the equipment and make sure it's running right, provide the customer with with their service contract service.
Excuse me.
So so you're going to take that guy, you're going to teach him where to place the probes in the machine, and you're going to teach him how to clean the condenser coil. You're going to teach him how to check for loose connections at the disconnect, how to
Hmm.
check for loose connections to the contactor, how to visually identify capacitors going bad. And it doesn't, the mechanics of what we do are fairly simple. I mean, they're just, they're primarily cleaning things and fixing bad connections on wiring. And so that doesn't take a long time for somebody to actually learn the
Hmm.
mechanics of what we do. What takes a long time to understand is how electricity works. and it takes a while to understand how does a refrigerant cycle work and how does a heat pump work and how do
Hmm.
controls work. But you can start somebody out on equipment that's actually working, and the software, you deploy the probes, the software will tell them if they have a low charge or a high charge or low airflow or high airflow or a bad compressor or a dirty condenser or whatever thing you want to throw at it. It'll tell you what's wrong, and then it'll tell you the basics on how to fix it. And so we have contractors in Ohio here that have that
Excuse me. Oh, all right. Sorry. Go
we have
ahead.
we have contractors in Ohio here that are they're taking uh, cable TV installers, people that have good customer service skills. And
Mm,
a cable TV guy comes in and it's like, hey, really good guy. How would you like a job in the HVAC industry? Well, what do I got to do? Well, come to this class. It's about 8 weeks long. We're going to train you on HVAC, and they'll
mhm,
start them out at 25-30 dollars an hour as a PM technician, and they're using, and if they get in trouble with MeasureQuick, they just stream the
mhm,
data. So I mean, if they have a problem, they just stream the data. So they teach them the fundamentals of what they do. And if you got to get a more seasoned, advanced tech out because it ends up being, instead of a tune up, it ends up being a service call. Then you
mhm.
reschedule and you get a service tech out there if you have to do that.
Gotcha.
But these guys
So
are,
for like most of the basic operations, replacing a blower motor, that types of 6 to 8 weeks, and then maybe a little more time for some of those more complex things that
yeah,
requires a better understanding of the fundamentals.
yeah. I mean, but that's the way it is in our industry. Period. I mean,
Yeah,
some guys can wire a heat pump up and all the controls. Other guys, it'd be daunting to them to do that, and so it doesn't take a. I mean, if you think about it, here's a good way to think about it. I taught a
hmm
I taught a program, a 2-year program for vocational school. You go, wow, 2 years, that's enough time to learn a trade. Except it's 3 hours a day, ends up being 1,080 hours of training. And I've got a lot of interruptions in between my program because you're in a school system, so you got assemblies, you got downtime for attendance, you got, so let's say, but let's just keep it at 1,080 hours. That's 6 months of a work year. 2,080 hours is a work year. So in that 2-year period, it's like 6 months of on the job training. So in 8 weeks, you get enough to get your feet wet. And then 6 months from now, you're as good as one of my kids is that graduated a 2-year training program. And I don't care what 2-year program you go to. It's just that on the job training is so intense that you can pick up a lot. And if you have the right tools to actually uh, if you have the right tools to help you with the complex parts, the diagnostic parts, the reporting parts, it just makes it a lot easier to do. So we can, you know, very early in their career, we can, and that was sort of the whole impetus behind designing MeasureQuick, was to try and get uh, people more successful earlier in their career
yeah,
and doing better diagnostics and generating more revenue per ticket.
for
Um,
sure.
so
Do you think a tech ever gets to a point where like they understand the fundamentals so well that the like regular ongoing training isn't really going to do much for them?
No, no, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm
Hmm.
still fixated on the fundamentals because,
Interesting.
yeah, I'm still learning stuff every single day. And the problem is like with the fundamentals is that eventually they become common knowledge so much that people don't talk about them. So like in our current textbooks, the fundamentals a lot of times are skipped over because
Mhm.
they're assuming that you already have a background in some of the fundamental things that you don't need the training in it, or they're glossed over to the point um where people just miss them. And so you
Mhm.
really got to dive deep into a good textbook to actually start to understand. I mean, when I was teaching, because I taught the same class for 12 years, I would all of a sudden realize that something in chapter 38 related all the way back to chapter 3. And I'd go back to chapter 3 and I go, oh, now I get why they brought up that formula. Q equals mass times specific heat times delta T. And I'm all the way in chapter 38 in psychometrics now. And it's like connecting the dots together. But it would
Mm,
take
yeah.
years for me to do that, even reading the same
Yeah.
book over and over again, because you gotta you got to
You have
have
new
some
context and
context.
then you're
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. You got new context to put the relationship together. So it's
100%.
so yeah, it takes MeasureQuick's like if you use MeasureQuick, it's going to help you understand the fundamentals way faster, but I don't think you could ever overlearn them.
Mm, okay. Interesting. So with all this like AI coming out, like, and I'm not just talking about your like how you are applying it to take over more of the menial stuff. How do you feel like it'll affect just blue collar trades in general? Auto mechanics, HVAC techs. Like, what shifts do you think we're going to see in the industry
Uh,
in the coming years?
I think we're going to see more administrative shifts. Dispatching will be done by AI based upon technician skill set and ability. So you might have techs that are better at selling, and you might have techs that are better at repair. So, like, the system's going to come up. You're going to find out it's an 8-year-old system, and they're going to send out a repair
Hmm.
tech versus a sales tech. On
Right.
a 22-year-old system, they're going to send a sales tech out that just they have no ability to repair anything, but they could sell,
Right.
snow to an Eskimo. And so I think that's one thing that's gonna change. I think we'll do more dispatching based upon technician location and availability and skills. I think we might do uh, might do better with customers identifying what they bought in the past and if they're going to tend to buy more services, more things in the future. So,
Hmm.
like what things you might want to recommend if you're a service tech.
Mm. Okay.
So uh, I think the billing and the bookkeeping, will be done uh, better with some AI tools and things like that. But like I said, AI is never going to change a furnace. It's never gonna adjust a valve. It's never going to do anything that's going to take the
You
work
don't
away
think
from the
we'll get
technician.
the robotics that good to be able to do that eventually?
No, no, I really don't think so because there's just, I mean, seriously, if you look at, I think it was I can't remember how many terawatts of power it would require to replace the human brain, which runs off of like 14 watts or 16 watts of power.
Mm.
I mean, the human brain is so much more complex and so much more powerful than anything we have on AI today that
Right. Yeah.
that I just don't see it being replaced that easily. I think the menial tasks like getting customer information, equipment information, those will all be done by AI. But the mechanics of what we do, it's got to be done with somebody that actually knows how to do it. So, and there's
Gotcha.
too many variables to try and have a robot go down and fix your furnace. Hell, just
Right.
trying to get in the attic. Just think about if you had to build a robot to crawl through a crawl space or an attic.
Right. That's a feat in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. As far as like how companies actually utilize MeasureQuick, is it kind of like the same um, kind of template for each person as far as like the recommendations it makes, or does can each company kind of customize um, how that technician uses it, or the recommendations that it would give, or the
So, I mean, MeasureQuick's designed to be able to use how you want to use it, so it can be used in context with a project. So you're going out to specifically
Mhm.
do a service, or you're going out to specifically do an installation, or it can be used for quick tests, like you just want to do a quick assessment of the duct system or a quick assessment of the performance, or so the way that it's used is all over the place, depending on the type of customer and the
Mhm.
type of users. Some people just use it to pair up their Bluetooth tools and do the calculations. Other people use it to do full reporting and photo, and scoring and all kinds of things. Quality installations, verified operations, used in utility programs. We're all over the place. So, but as far as the data output goes, it's all based on the data input. So the one thing that we significantly improved almost accidentally was when we started using AI to strip the data off the labels and populate the application. It brought the quality of our data way up because AI doesn't put anything in the wrong fields. It doesn't
Mhm.
transpose numbers. It doesn't screw anything up like humans do. So
Mhm.
taking that data input away inadvertently made our diagnostics better because we have better information to
Interesting.
start with.
Yeah,
So
100%. That's cool.
and so whatever you put in is what you get out. If you tell it you have a TXV metering device, what's going to run an analysis based upon a TXV. If you actually have a fixed orifice, it's going to give you, bad inform. It's going to give you bad information because you gave it bad information. It is a garbage in, garbage out. You have to, I need to know what refrigerant you have in your system. If you tell me you have
Mm,
R22 and you have 410A, all the calculations are going to be off. So
true.
it's,
Yeah.
so having that label reader, what's cool is because like OCR, you have to be able to really like see the label to make the recognize the characters. With AI, I don't know what it does, but you can take labels that are unreadable to a human, and it must just adjust the contrast on them until it can see them because it pulls out data that we could never get off of regular OCR. So
Okay.
it's worked out pretty well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something. In the past couple of years, I've noticed people started doing these static pressure checks,
Hmm.
where if the ductwork is not, um, I guess, big enough to support the airflow of that HVAC system, it kind of pushes back against the HVAC system, wears it out sooner. So a lot of guys have been kind of proposing, taking what might have been an HVAC replacement and also selling the customer a new ductwork. So I'm just curious, have you seen that? Any
Oh
thoughts
yeah,
about that?
there's a static pressure screening built into MeasureQuick. So
Okay.
and we have NCI, National Comfort Institute, does a lot of training on that. So we branded that one at National Comfort Institute. But what those static pressure screenings do is allow you to determine if you have a problem in the return duct, the filter, the evaporator coil, or the supply duct, right? Or
Hmm.
you could have
Okay.
problems in all of them, which is not uncommon. And what usually happens is the duct system is sized, I would say most of the time, not all the time, but at least in our climate zone here, most of the time the duct system is sized properly. What happened was somebody decided at some point the system wasn't cooling well. And they assumed their
Hmm.
2 ton system was doing 2 tons of cooling, probably only doing a ton and a half or a ton. And they said, you know what? We're going to put a 3 ton system on this. And they oversized the equipment to the duct system.
Hmm.
And so now the new system can't perform well because it's choked down, low airflow on an undersized duct system. So a
Okay.
lot of times what we need to do when we're coming in is the first thing we need to do is do a heat loss calculation. We need to understand how big the equipment needs to be for the house. And then we need to do an assessment of the duct system and see if the duct system is adequate for the equipment that we're going to select to install. And then, then we do our, then you can make a good recommendation to replace the equipment, to replace the duct system, or replace everything. And then the other
Hmm.
thing you got to look at is like some ducts, like flex ducts, they have a pretty definitive life. They last, 15 to 20 years, but the plastics and the materials start to break down, the insulation starts to break down. So if you're in an attic or something like that, you may need to replace that flex duct system. Where metal ducts have longer life, but metal ducts also have a lot of leaks. I mean, you can
Hmm.
have a very poorly installed metal duct system or a very poorly installed sheet metal system. Sometimes you just have to change everything because it's putting new equipment on old duct systems just doesn't work well. It's sort of being like putting a new heart and somebody needs a triple bypass, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. You got to get the blood flowing before you change the heart out. And it's the same thing with equipment. We got to make sure we're going to have adequate airflow, or you're going to have dramatically shorter equipment life and really high bills. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. Um, well, hey, thank you so much for being on, Jim.
Yep.
Super informative stuff. And hopefully this helps some guys out there kind of know how they can empower their team a little bit better. If somebody's not using MeasureQuick, they would just go to measurequick.com and sign up there, right?
Yeah, or just go to the App Store or Google Play and do a search for MeasureQuick. It's a free application. You can use a lot of it and connect all your tools and do diagnostics at no charge. So it's a really powerful tool, even if you're not a subscriber. But if you subscribe to services, then you get cloud storage, reporting, data streaming, a lot of really cool productivity tools. So
Okay.
it's worth looking at it both ways.
Very cool.
All right.
Awesome. Hey, well,
Thanks,
thank you,
Stephen.
Jim.
All right. Bye.
Take care.